much time. So welcome everybody who's joined us. This is the Pharma multi-channel meetup. We got some new people joining us on this, as well as some old and familiar names. So welcome everyone. Today we're talking about building high-value relationships with customers and capturing consent in and I've added this peri and post-COVID world because it's going to be a long time before we're post-COVID. As some of you are aware about the meetup, it's really an eclectic group of people who are interested in different topics, and we run webinars that interest us. Okay, and this one came about because for those who don't know me, I'm James Harper. I'm the managing director and founder of a company called 28B, and we're Viva optimization specialists. And a lot of what we do at the moment is helping clients get into the remote space through Viva Engage, and just developing an awful lot of Viva approved emails. And as I was looking at those emails, it struck me how transactional they were. There wasn't really much in terms of the value proposition. Whilst it seemed incredibly important to each of our customers that they get consent or they get an agreement with their customers, the HCPs, it's not that important. So it started me thinking about what is the value proposition for the industry? How do we re-engage with our customers after this disruption? And that was this idea was further fermented because of Ben, who's going to present to us in a moment from Tangent 90 with their product Trustrack. Those guys have just launched a consent capture module, which I was really impressed by. And I thought, together with Chris Bartley, who I'll introduce in a second, we could do something really interesting around high value relationships and capturing consent. And equally, we'll be joined in a panel discussion by Neil, who I'll introduce more formally later on, who comes from Bob Health, and again, a really interesting angle on the value of exchange of ideas and innovation within the NHS and where that value lies. And I hope you'll see how that will all come together. Some rules, he says, trying to click on the PowerPoint. Oh yeah, that's me, email address, and Christine, who's also on camera, is my co-host from Salamandra UK, animation and 3D specialists. So please look them up, and if you have any questions that we don't answer in this session, either myself or Christine can field those. Our values, which is cunningly covered. I should know my own values, but it's cunningly covered by the participants list. Be open, be curious, share, and signpost. This is a free event. There's no agenda here. It's really just what we're interested in, what we think you're interested in. And we put this together for free every month, 6 weeks. If you have any ideas that you'd like to share, if you've got comments or anything you think will be helpful, please, just get in touch. It's not a formal place, and I hope you'll find it of value. So the rules, there has to be rules. You guys can't say anything because you're all muted. Sorry about that. But if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A rather than the chat. It allows us to manage those questions. If the questions are very specific to one of the presenters, I'll try and ask that between the talks. But if there's something that I believe it represents a wider thing, we'll save that for the panel discussion. And I should have looked at my own slides again. We are recording this event, and we do have a YouTube channel called if you just search Pharma MCM, multi-channel meetup on the YouTube, it'll all come up. And all of our previous events, of which there are 11 now, Chrissy, I think 11, 12, are all on there. Some are broken up into different talks, others are the whole thing. There is some value there, and encourage you to have a look. And then if you want to tweet for whatever reason, it's hashtag Pharma MCM. Okay. So agenda, how are we doing? I'm going to get ahead, I think, of the curve in terms of timing. So which is great, because I'd much rather have more time with the panelists at the end. So what are we going to talk about today? So Chris Bartley, who, if you don't know Chris, you really should. And if you don't follow him on Twitter or LinkedIn, you definitely should. One of the most informed and influential thought leaders around social and in our industry. Now the Innovations and Partnership Director at MedShare. He's going to kick off with how to win doctors and influence people. I'll say no more so I don't steal his thunder. After that, we've got Ben, who I mentioned earlier, and Audrey, who's the Digital Strategy Director at Tangent 90. They'll be talking both, and it is about their product. I make no bones, I'm not ashamed about that. I think it's an excellent product. I talk about it all the time. It's one of a kind, so I don't feel it's like, we're just setting it. It's not a sale thing, but it's about their product. But also Audrey will be talking about the digital strategy side of things and engaging with customers. And then we'll go on to the panel discussion, where, as I said earlier, we'll be joined by Neil Crump, who is a long-time friend and colleague of mine from so many years in the industry, incredibly well-informed when it comes to our customers, patients, the value that we add as an industry, but also the interactions between those groups. And he is, whilst he is the co-founder of Aurora, who some of you we are very much aware of, he's also the co-founder and chief partnership officer at Bob.health, which if you don't know about, you should. A fantastic and again, unique offering that's connecting best practice within the NHS, but also connecting the pharma industry to the NHS around ideas and innovation. And it represents a very interesting and innovative new way of us working together with our customers, which is why I wanted to add him into the panel discussion at the end. And that panel discussion will obviously be with Chris, Ben, Audrey, and with Neil. And I think I am at that point. Yeah, I'm not going to go to thank you yet. That would be too early. So I'm going to hand over now to Chris. The rest of us are going to disappear off the video and we'll pop back in between talks and at the end of the panel. Over to you, Chris.
Brilliant. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Let me just get the slides up and go. So hi, everyone. I thought I would just start with a very quick introduction to me, simply because it will give you a good insight into why I'm going to present lots of data, hopefully in a really interesting, compelling way with a nice narrative around it. My background is, my degree is in computer science. I then worked in agency for a very long time, most recently as the managing director of Havas Life Medicom, which is one of the bigger European agencies. During that time, I've also co-authored a book on social media, The Social CEO. I regularly write for Branding magazine and regularly publish there. And I currently work for MedShare, which is an app which is probably best described as a cross between Instagram and LinkedIn, but just for verified healthcare professionals. That app across the last 4 or 5 years has gone from 1,000 doctors to over 1.2 million doctors using the app and using the platform to share cases with each other, which I think probably tells you quite a lot about the direction and the way that doctors are thinking and the types of platforms that they're engaging with. They mirror a lot of what we're doing ourselves in terms of social media. In terms of the slides, I'll show this slide again right at the end of the presentation. If you want the references or you want any of the slides, this barcode here, you can just open your phone up, you can open LinkedIn, you'll find at the very top a little button. You click on that barcode button and it will connect you with me, and I'll happily share references and bits and pieces with you if you drop me a note. But really what I wanted to cover and what I wanted to talk about is what we're all doing, what we all want to do and want to achieve in our roles. And to me, the key thing that all of us in pharma, whether on the agency side, whether on the client side, is our job and our role is to increase appropriate prescribing. And that's good for the companies we work for, but that's also good for patients as well. So I thought a nice place to start would be what doctors say influences their prescribing. And you can see here quite a nice, very clear divide, which is slightly concerning if you work in pharma or an agency, which really says that what's most influential is everything that pharma doesn't do, and what's least influential is everything that pharma does. And actually, when you look at it from a digital point of view and you ask doctors similar questions, you see a similar trend. Everything that's kind of pharma related is least influential, and everything which is non-pharma is most influential. And you sort of think, oh dear, this is a bit of a challenge. Maybe we've been getting things wrong for a few years. However, there is a very big but that comes along with this, which is that what people say and what they actually do are really quite different things. And so we need to be quite careful and quite aware of that and quite cautious around the different data points that we listen to. And we see that with this study here. So this is a study where they asked doctors again, but they asked doctors after they had prescribed a specific product, what were the factors that contributed towards that prescription? What were the points of influence? And what you see here is that the pharmaceutical representative was way and above the most influential thing of that doctor's prescription. And that's kind of interesting because that's largely the opposite of what we just saw. So the immediate question is why? And actually the why is quite simple. It's because the volume of noise that was made by the pharmaceutical industry to those doctors was nearly 50% of everything that they heard in the context of that drug. Nearly 50%. So they dominated share of voice, therefore they dominated share of mind, therefore it had a huge role in influencing that prescription. And this is actually this is the key point in the presentation to some extent, because how are we going to maintain that share of voice and that level of influence? And I guess just to support that point, also looked at a whole bunch of other studies about what influences doctors' behavior and what sits behind that. What are the tactics and what are the things that influence doctors? And across a multitude of studies, this was incredibly rigorous and robust. You saw the numbers of studies that they narrowed out. Across these 58 most robust studies of what works from a pharmaceutical marketing point of view, rep visits, lots of evidence, strong impact in terms of prescribing. And you can see here that these other activities all have a level of an effect and a level of influence. And again, the reason why is because we spend more on those rep activities than we do on almost everything else put together. So our voice as the pharmaceutical industry is heavily dominated by reps, which again, comes back to this key point of, if that's the case, but rep access is falling, rep influence is falling. And we hear this all the time, hence the kind of collective groan that I can already hear across this phone call. But there's more to this, in that this recent crisis is causing almost near zero interactions, face-to-face interactions with pharmaceutical reps. This is data to the end of May that shows the number of face-to-face interactions with doctors. Near zero levels, and when we look forward and we ask doctors what they expect across the next 6 months, they expect the next 6 months to look pretty similar, to the point where maybe there will be half as many rep interactions as there were previously. So when we think about that share of voice piece, we could be losing half our share of voice, half our ability to influence appropriate prescribing in this setting and in this scenario. And I think it gets more challenging because while we will have all switched, so we've switched to email, we've switched to virtual meetings, that comes with its own challenge in that those virtual meetings are relatively easy to set up with the doctors who already prescribe a lot of the medicines that we're working on. The people that we know really well, we can get calls with. The people who aren't prescribing our medicines or are prescribing very little of our medicines, they're incredibly difficult to engage with through these virtual channels. They're not going to, either you're not going to have permission to email them, or you're going to find it very difficult to set up virtual meetings with them. And you don't have that ability for the rep to pitch up at the door and engage with those doctors. So again, the type of doctor and the type of interactions we can have is more limited. Now, you may say, does that really matter? Because we want to make sure that we're engaging with our most loyal doctors. However, what we see from the data is that kind of protecting market share, trying to reduce the defection rate of doctors, trying to stop them from prescribing other products and maintain them on our products, is not as effective as getting more doctors to prescribe our medicines, getting more low prescribers and more non-prescribers to start prescribing more. That's the most effective way to grow a brand. And we see that both across consumer marketing, we see that in business-to-business marketing, and we see that with doctors. So that's quite a big challenge. We need to reach more than just the doctors that we know, which is what we're doing right now. We need to reach non-prescribers and low prescribers, particularly because they are the real high-value customers in terms of driving brand growth. And we need to maintain that level, that share of voice that we've been fortunate to have up until now, and not start to get drowned out by other channels. So how are we going to do that? How else can we reach doctors? Well, through digital channels, through online, and we do that already. So on average, pharma as an industry, we contact doctors about 2,800 times each year through digital and non-personal channels. That's about 84 hours per year of their time that we as pharma, as a collective industry, manage to consume of their time. The slight challenge with this is that it's not very much. When you look at the 15 hours or so that doctors under 45, 9 hours or so that doctors over 45 spend online for professional purposes, That time that we looked at is only about 30 minutes of that week. That's about 5% share of voice. That's a massive drop on the 50% share of voice that we had in the old world, in the pre-COVID world. So we've got a real challenge and a real gap there. If we're going to fill that gap, we have to be where doctors are. And where they are is on their mobile phones. They're not spending a lot of time on web. I mean, many of the doctors, especially hospital doctors, are not in front of a computer. They're in front of their mobile phone all day. So that's where we need to engage them. It's the primary tool for 81% of doctors, for online research, for education, for peer interactions, nearly 70% using an online education site or app on a daily basis. They're using these tools all through their working day. They're using it during consultations. They're utilizing it between consultations. They're utilizing it on their way home. They're utilizing this when they're sat at home watching TV with the kids. They're utilizing these platforms to upskill themselves on their practice, to think about how they're going to manage and engage the patients they've either seen that day or that they're going to be seeing the following day. So we have to be delivering our content and maintaining our share of voice through their mobile phone. And then, not surprisingly, there are many apps, services, providers who are already delivering a lot of content through mobile. The ones listed on here are all of the providers who have an audience of over 1 million healthcare professionals, at least. There are many others as well who are not on this slide. This is where the 95% share of voice lies in that online setting, is with a lot of the people on the screen here. So we as pharma need to be on these channels in order to maintain that level and that share of voice. And you see this slide that we saw previously, again, over the next 6 months, online portals for HCPs, virtual congresses, remote interactions with peers. That's where the shift is going to be moving to, in terms of, it has been 15 hours, but now it's likely to be 16, 17. You know, that's where some of the time that would have been spent with in-person meetings with field teams is moving to. So it's becoming increasingly important to be on these channels, particularly due to the COVID crisis. Has just amplified and speeded up this requirement. And what we haven't done is, we've talked a lot about the need for maintaining share of voice, maintaining presence. But there's obviously another important component to this, which is how do we do that in terms of content? What types of information do we need to be sharing? How do we engage audiences with that? Well, this presents an interesting challenge, because for our field teams, we had much greater control over the interaction. They were there in front of the doctor, they commanded their attention, they were able to carve out time to deliver that content and deliver those messages that we wanted to communicate. In an online setting, the audience has the power and the control. They can tune out at any time, they can click off at any time. In order to get them to look at things, they have to be much more compelling, much more relevant, much more interesting. Otherwise, people will simply dive off and have a very short interaction, and you won't be able to deliver your content to them. Now, for launch brands, I don't think it matters that much. You know, the power of that new piece of information, new science, new medicines, that's why doctors started in medicine, is to see new medicines that can help and support their patients to have better outcomes. So your mix of content is slightly less important, because what you have to say is really relevant, really novel, and is going to be of high value and interest to the doctor. For brands that aren't in that immediate launch phase, it requires much more thought and consideration in order to be able to hook doctors in. So the content is going to have to be much more tuned around their preferences, what they're really interested in seeing, particularly if we then want them to take that next step of, from that initial seeded piece of content in a third-party platform, click through onto our platforms, give us permission to create a further, deeper engagement with them. That's where it needs to be med-ed, data, publications, scientific content. And we know that that's the right type of content, because when doctors talk about what influences their prescribing, what types of content, they talk about medical journals and congresses. Now, what this is a really good indication of is that of what they want to influence their prescribing. the information and the sources that they value highly and see as credible and interesting, the type of information sources they're most likely to choose, select, dive into, and that will then drive permission or consent in order to click through into a more promotional website or into further content that's controlled by the companies. The final thing I just wanted to touch on was for established products, you may not necessarily want those, or you may not necessarily need those very deep interactions. You may simply be able to support the doctor in terms of delivering ads simply as a reminder to them that these products still exist, remind them why they love prescribing them for so many years, and just make sure that they're still front of mind. Make sure that you still have that high share of voice. So in terms of concluding and summing that talk up, we know that reps work, and we know that they work particularly well when they're the dominant source of information for doctors, when they have that very high share of voice. Reps are going to continue to be a really effective way to engage your kind of loyal customers, if you like, your high prescribers, the doctors who have opted in, who give permission. Reps still dominate there. However, in this new virtual world, in the kind of post-COVID world, reaching the doctors that we don't know, and the doctors who aren't already engaging with us, is much, much harder than it has been previously. And we're going to have to increase the level of budget, increase the level of spend on delivering content that's really relevant to those doctors, that they want to engage with, that they're prepared to give permission to receive more of, where those doctors are at the moment, on those millions of, or on those platforms with millions of doctors on them already. In terms of those platforms, the platforms that are mobile led, that are peer-to-peer led, are likely to be the most effective channels to invest in. They're the ones where we see the trends of doctors increasing their use, increasing their desire to have information from those channels. And then finally, the content needs to be focused specifically to attract those non-prescribers or low prescribers, high value, high interest scientific content that takes that doctor as an entry point for a journey to click, to provide permission to receive further content, where you can then build that relationship that allows access to see your representatives, allows access for more promotional content to be delivered to those doctors, that maintains that share of voice that we've been so fortunate to enjoy previously. And I think that brings me to the end of the talk, which is probably good, seeing as how the builders seem to have fired up a whole load of noise in the background, and I'm sure that's starting to get distracting. So James, I will pass back to you.
Thanks, Chris. So if anyone ever wonders what value it is that reps bring to customers, quick story: when I became a rep, my dad was a GP, and I asked him, I felt a bit like I might have joined the dark side, because some doctors don't talk well of reps and all the rest of it, and I was a bit unsure about what I was doing. I just needed a car and some money. I'd come out of university with a fairly useless degree, and my father said that they were a huge asset to him. He would listen to reps from similar companies, throw in a pinch of salt, because they could digest huge amounts of information and deliver it in a really concise, easy to consume and informative way, which is what Chris has just done. Whenever you hear Chris speak, he's just a font of knowledge. You know where you get all this stuff from, and whenever you got like filing cabinets full of virtual filing cabinets, but it's amazing, and that's what a good rep does. That's what a good presenter does. So thank you, Chris. That's amazing as always. So what was great about that as well is just a proof point around the value of reps, and the influence that reps have around appropriate prescribing. For as long as I've been in the industry, 28 years, there's been discussion about the end of the rep, and the rep is no more, and all the rest of it. And I'm glad to see that's not happening, especially as we focus on the rep to customer brand value piece as a company. So 39% influence on appropriate prescribing, which is great to see, but potentially we're going to lose 50% of our share of voice. So it's great to hear about these other channels, understanding where the customers are, etc. But a huge part of this, so it's about finding those other channels, about using those other channels appropriately, but also about protecting and empowering our multi-channel reps to access the doctors that they couldn't access before, but also certainly to continue the doctors they can. So that will all come down to consent, of course. Whilst you don't need consent to ask to see a doctor, once you want to share some promotional materials with them, you need to make sure that's in place, which is my fairly ham-fisted segue into the next presentation. So if I can ask for Ben and Audrey to come in and to swap screens. No specific questions for you, Chris, so we'll save that towards the end, let that come in. And I'm going to hand over with no further ado to these guys. Thank you, by the way, Chris. I don't think I actually said that. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, James. So very good to join everybody today. My name is Audrey Gent, as James already said, and I'm working as the Strategy Director at Tangent 90, and I'm joined by Ben today, who's the Sales Director. So we're going to cover really a couple of things. So my section will be looking very much at the changing digital landscape of kind of customer engagement. So some of that's been touched already by Chris. And then we're going to look at how that perhaps has impacted a shift in content and channel preferences from customers. And then Ben will be taking us through some use cases around how we might capture consent and how the Trustrack consent solution works. So at the moment, we know that many of the markets that probably, if you're working for a pharma company or you're supporting a pharma company that you're supporting, they're still undergoing an awful lot of restrictions in terms of the access that we have to customers and the way that we're able to, enter into that dialogue with them, especially from the rep perspective. And the data we can see here is actually from across health, and it shows a real shift in both basically at the moment, how we're now we're really just in that only digital phase, and how we've had a real change in what, certainly in the UK, no more face-to-face meetings, and they've moved to that digital only setting. And the long-term impact, I liked that we said at the beginning, James, about that we're not even really calling this the new normal, the new post-COVID, because we don't know when that will be, but actually that, we're going to have to shift and adapt because we don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but we do know that it will be considerably different, and the role of the rep, exactly as we've just mentioned, is going to change and how to evolve with that. And that means that pharma need to really rethink their engagement models and look at how digital can be a real way of serving physicians better at this time. So the preferences, the time pressures, new content requirements coming from pharma, from customers, and they too have changed, depending on the specialities you're working with. And again, as I mentioned previously, it's important that the approach that we take as supporters of pharma or as pharma modifies to support that. And what we can see on this slide is some global Sermo and across health data from March and April this year, and it's showing that 55% of physicians that were interviewed, when they were asked what the top 3 ways they wanted to pharma to contact them, one of the choices was, as you can see here, rep triggered email. So that very valuable channel that we all know, really high open rates, again, if we serve the right content, if we have it as a very joined up customer journey. And HCPs are searching for content that is adding value. And generally now we're seeing a real shift, I think, towards the need for science, and that's delivered via the channels that they want, and it's enabling them really ultimately to make those right decisions for their patients. So in the middle here, you can see that 51% of physicians, and I think there was a slightly different stat, but again, this is very much COVID-19 data in Chris's presentation, saying that medical journals would be their choice, highlighting a need for that real world evidence and the importance that, we need to emphasize, certainly if we're serving pharma or as pharma themselves, in terms of ensuring that the content is right in this new environment in which we're working. And then finally, but very not least, again, James mentioned about this new remote environment we're working in, and I've been the same, working with a lot of organisations around supporting that remote engagement channel from a content perspective is thinking about that critical role the rep plays. And you can see here 37% of global HCPs, and actually it rises to 39% of EU HCPs would choose to meet with the rep in a remote setting. So if we think about this change in the way, you know, perhaps we're segmenting our customers based on a shifting channel preferences, shifting needs in terms of the content, so maybe more focus on digital patient resource, for example, the scientific evidence, then really it's even more important that we gain access, we gain consent to enable pharma to be able to continue that dialogue and to extend that dialogue across those channels, and to ensure that we can really add value beyond, you know, the fact that we're now not able to meet in that face-to-face setting. So at one point I just forgot to make on that last slide actually, so the 67% there, I think that was really interesting, sorry Ben, that was my gotcha. So this is the Across Health During Maturometer survey, which actually goes out to enterprise pharma across the industry, so it's very recent. This one came out at the beginning of this month, and it came in very clearly that in the kind of second or third priority at the moment for pharma is to ensure they have a really strong opt-in database, which you know, is enabling them to make these continued and ongoing and increased connections with their customers. So the solution that Trustrack offers is a two-click process. So it's designed to be really simple, and it allows the physician to submit an electronic signature or simply tick a box to be able to provide their consent. And it supports any remote engagement, so that can be via Viva or via any other remote solution that you're using, so Zoom or IQVIA, for example. And it can also be via virtual event software, so if it's more of a symposia or a congress. And it provides instant consent. So while that interaction is taking place, that consent can be granted and it can be visualized as well. And it can all be set up really quickly from a kind of integration perspective. So Ben, over to you.
That's great. Thanks, Audrey, and thanks to Chris and James for the first part of the presentation. It was great. So I'm going to take you through the Trustrack platform. So we're going to focus on a couple of different scenarios first of all. So I'm going to do a demo on the one-to-one rep meeting. For that demo, I'm going to take you through it in a Viva environment. As Audrey mentioned, it works across all platforms. We are an open platform, so this can integrate into any CRM, whether that's IQVIA, Viva, Microsoft Dynamics. You know, it's very flexible and easy to move around. And what we're saying as well, that this is a complementary consent solution to existing consent. So we're not saying that you have to completely replace everything, or we can integrate with that. Or if you don't have a consent solution, like I'm seeing with a lot of my customers, we can provide that complete end-to-end solution. So it's very flexible to be able to do this. So we're going to cover the one-to-one rep engage meeting. Then I'm going to show you how to capture multiple consents. So this can be used in different scenarios, whether it's in a webinar. So I'm going to do a live demo and actually share a consent link within the chat window. So you guys can actually click on it and have a look at what actually comes through and how quick and easy it is to come back into our system for approval. And then I don't actually have a demo, but if there are any of you out there that are really kind of struggling with the change from obviously the Congress, the events, obviously because of the COVID-19 epidemic, we actually have a virtual event solution. So we'd happily be happy to arrange a meeting to continue conversation, to show you how we can really enhance that solution and provide content that can be distributed at your virtual events as well. So there's lots of different things that we can do with this content solution, and really kind of make it valuable for you as a customer to be able to capture that very quickly. Before I go into the consent solution, as Chris and James have mentioned, it's all well and good having a solution or technology, but what you really need to do is make something valuable to a HCP for them to really want to consent. So the Trustrack platform is made up of three key areas. So we have consent, we have access, and we have insight. So just to really kind of, we've covered the consent side, but access, what we're able to do now is to handle any type of scientific content. So this could be publications, e-prints, clinical posters, anything that has copyright or any type of medical legal regulation that needs to be tracked. What we have is a distribution and management platform that can be added onto the consent solution. So what we can do is, you can see an example here. I've got 7 different channels which we can gain consent across. At that same point of time of gaining consent, we can actually distribute that science, that real world evidence to support your promotional material. So it gives you that solution of gain that consent, provide them with the content that's really valuable that these HCPs are really wanting to get. And then the final part is the insight. So what we can provide then is another level of reporting to complement your CRM, so your promotional material insight. So what we can do is we can provide clicks and opens, most popular content, dwell times, and this can be all configured to your workflows and really start to give you granular data around scientific content, which then can be passed into the brand and marketing teams to really help shape that future communication. So you can start to understand, as well as promotional material, what do they want to see? What's really driving that prescribing decision? So we really see that with the science. So with the Trustrack solution, you have that consent, you have that compliant delivery of scientific content, and then you have that really great insight and reporting on how that's being consumed to really shape that communication moving forward. So without going into too much detail about each channel, we can integrate with detail aids, we can do Congress solutions, and as Chris mentioned, the mobile is a major factor. So we can even provide SMS, WeChat, WhatsApp solutions for certain markets that have that approved. So you can imagine with what we're doing now, we can actually distribute, collect that consent at any digital touch point across a variance of digital channels which HCPs are using. So very effective on that. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to take you through 6 simple steps just to talk you through how we can get instant consent capture. So we integrate with any touch point. So this could be, as we've touched on, a remote meeting as we're in now, rep triggered email at a virtual congress. So the rep would actually log into the solution. Here, what they can do is they can complete the Trustrack consent form. So they would populate with these details. We do integrate with databases as well. So we can actually automate all this process to pull data into the forms and make it a very quick, streamlined process. Then the rep would actually create a link, and this link can be dropped into the chat, as I'm going to show on the demo. We can create QR codes, because there's been a few challenges with companies not actually using the chat window. That's actually blocked. So we can provide a QR code screen, QR code on the screen, which can be then scanned by your phone or by your iPad, and the HCP will instantly have their consent form there. So once that's gone through, that will be pre-populated form they receive to make the user experience very quick and easy. And what we have is one click, and then for audit purposes, we are seeing now that we have to capture a signature, so we can actually have the sign with the mouse, or we can actually type in to actually populate that signature process. As soon as that click consent button, we actually take care of all of the workflows behind that. So that would go straight back into the CRM of choice. That reporting could be pushed off into different reporting channels or anything like that in a very simple workflow that we use. And the great thing about the platform is this is regionalized and country level. So there could be different consents for different countries, different regions. The platform will be configured for each of them. We'll integrate with different databases. You know, this is part of the solution and part of our expertise around consent capture that we provide as part of the solution for you guys. So I'm going to play you a couple of short videos. So this is, first of all, we're going to do this through the Viva Engage. So I'm just going to take you through the process of going in. We're going to create the meeting, first of all, in the Engage platform. So this is going to show you where the trigger is. So I'm just as a rep, I'm about to schedule the meeting, and I'm going to send over the link or the invitation to the HCP. As you can see, that's gone through. And then from here, what you'll see as soon as this comes through is I'll pause this now. So this is the only part that we integrate with Viva. So what we're doing is we're putting a launch part within the CLM. So this could be your consent trigger. And then what this does is this takes you from the Viva platform direct into our consent solution. So if I start the video again now, So when we click share, this now launches our platform. And here we are. So what we can do now, the rep can populate the content with all of the fields for the doctors. Again, any information that you want to capture can be customized. So what we've done here is we're sharing the link and we're going to put this into the chat window. So as soon as that goes through, what we see now is we will go to the HCP. So on the right hand side is the HCP that's just received the consent link. They will click onto this now. Just wait for that to catch up slightly. And here you can see they've received a complete pre-populated form. All you need to do now, scroll down, accept. This is why I was saying you can type in the signature or you can use the draw functionality. And if you look on the left-hand side any minute now, as soon as I hit the consent button, you get the consent automatically pop up within the consent platform. Again, this could highlight in Viva, this could highlight in IQVIA. There's lots of different ways that we can configure this. I've rolled out a lot of solutions over the last 3 months and everyone has been slightly different. So the configuration that can be completely customized to your workflows and compliance needs. But that just shows you how quick and easy it is from a quick launch right the way through to that acceptance. It's literally a 2-click process. And we can do that at the point of a call where you make the phone call to the doctor, you can have the platform open before continuing with that consent. Before continuing with the presentation, you can capture that consent in that quick process. So it's a very streamlined process. So now what I'm going to do is just quickly show you the one-to-many. And this is what we're getting a lot of interest is when we're doing webinars, when we're doing live events, is that there might be attendees that we don't have those details. So what we're doing is we're building that consent list. So I'm just going to escape out of here and move into the actual platform. So if you can bear with me for 1 second. Right, so what you can see here is going back to what I was saying around the Trustrack area, as well as just having the consent solution, this platform can carry all of the materials. So this was just an examples of different materials that we could carry for you. So you could actually, at point of send of the consent, you could actually attach scientific content or any of these types of content that you can see here. But for the purposes of today's demo, I'm just going to show you how quick and easy it is to set up a meeting. So as a rep, I'd log into the consent platform, click on meeting, I click new here and type in the names, set the date of the meeting. If we had a list of all of the attendees, we can load that up as a CSV file. And we use what's called like smart links within Trustrack. So this makes it a very quick and easy process. So once that a consent form's delivered, if I click on the link and I start to type my name, it will pre-populate with my details. Again, this can be switched on or off, depending on your medical regulations on that. We've had a couple of people that didn't want that functionality, but that is available if needed. And the other thing that's great is to ad hoc attendees. So we can click onto here now. We can send to our list of people, but then there could be another 10 or 15 people that we want to capture their details. They will just receive a blank form, which they can then populate their details. So what I've done here is I've set up a meeting for us for today, and I'm going to just show you, I'm just going to show you now what we call the traffic light approval system. So if I quickly share the link, so as you can see here, we've got the QR code that could be scanned now. That would bring through the consent form. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the link and I'm going to pop into the chat. Where's the chat gone? There we go. So I click onto here and I'm going to share this with you guys. Please feel free, hang on, I think all participants and attendees, let me try that. Right, so what you could do is if you wanted to have a look at the link, please feel free to click on it. But what I'm going to do is move back into the platform now so we can see, and I will go back so you can see the traffic light system. So if I click onto here, as you can see, James has already completed the form. I've got a couple of my other colleagues on there, but just to show you what's come through, if I click onto information, we've captured the email address, names, etc. This can be fully customized. You know, we can capture anything. And the other thing that I get asked a lot is, what about different levels of consent? This can be fully customized. This could be consent for promotional or non-promotional. This could be for telephone communication, email communication. It's really down to how you feel that this consent could really work. And as you can see, it's coming through. For any reason someone didn't consent, we would we'd have a red mark here saying not consented. And obviously the opt-out process could be built in as well. So this would all be part of the solution, which is then integrated backwards and forwards into your either your IQVIA database or your CRM. It's very quick and easy for us to be able to do that. So that was a quick demo of the platform. I'm just going to pop back into the presentation quickly. Slide. So just moving into my last slide, just to recap on what we're doing, just to kind of reinforce, this is great technology, but without a digital strategy plan, without using the key content that's really relevant, this is how you make a really successful consent solution. So this is what we're here to do. We're not just a software development company. We work with the likes of Chris and James to kind of make sure that we can deliver these type of solutions and make sure that the biggest impact. And you're providing consent and you're capturing consent, but you're making it really valuable to that customer. So just a few of the highlights. It is a 2-click process, very quick and easy, streamlined. It's fully customizable across all countries and regions for yourselves. It does the one-to-one, it does the one-to-many, and it works across a multi-channel environment. You can put this across, as I showed earlier, across your rep teams, your virtual congresses, websites, and it's a very centralized, uniform reporting back into any CRM or into any reporting tool that you would like. So that's the end of the presentation from myself. I'd like to pass back to James and thank you all for your time. It's great.
Brilliant, thank you, Ben and Audrey for that. But for the insights and demonstrating the platform, like I said at the beginning, right? I make no excuses about this just being a demonstration of that platform. For those of you that already know me, you'll know I probably get unreasonably excited or about something like that because it's scientific content with value proposition behind it if needed. It's integrated with CRM and with Viva. You've got analytics and insights coming out of it. The rep can orchestrate the workflow. You know, it's really well thought through and it's integrated with my pet platform Viva. So I like pet platform like I own it. So, you know, I see so many clients struggling, customers struggling with this problem right now, not just the value proposition, but the technical solution, the workflows, etc. So thank you for that. What I'd like to do is everyone, if they turn their cameras back on, we'll go to the panel discussion. If that's all right. And whilst we're doing that, I'm going to formally introduce Neil. I know I said he's a long-time friend, etc., but I didn't really give him his due. Neil and his team is a new startup called Bob.health. And it was, if I get this right, Neil, you look amazing considering that you pushed the launch from 13 weeks out to 3 weeks. And I know you said how well your team handled that and the stress of that, etc. But you did that so that you could support the NHS in sharing learnings around their response to COVID-19. So an incredibly responsible thing to do and a valuable thing to do. And like you've said to me, it's kind of amazing when you think that this sort of platform doesn't actually exist that allows best practice to be shared within the NHS. On the other side, I'm saying it again, I'm not going to steal your analogy, but on the other side, from a pharma perspective, what Bob Health can do is help spark NHS customers' conversation around medicines optimization, about medicine usage at a local level, etc. So what it struck me, that this panel in front of me, what would be an interesting discussion is, as Chris showed on one of his slides, which I'd love if you can call it back up, but don't, it's probably too much hassle, around the life cycle of a product. That when you're new and novel, you've got a new formulation, a new license or indication, a novel mode of action, or whatever it might be, people are interested. Okay, that's not that much of a challenge in terms of what's the value I'm taking to my customers. As that product starts to mature, then you've got new scientific, you've got phase 4s and things like that coming out, which is where Trustrack and the delivery of scientific information comes into play, and you've got that to back yourself, your product up, and to give that information to reps to share with their customers to have that value. When you go into a more mature phase, I know we've got Dan on the call, who I work with AZ, as did Neil, in the mature products brand. The challenge is different. It's a real challenge at that point. What do you do? So it really goes down at that point into medicine's provision, security of supply, services, added value. It gets harder to differentiate. But what's exciting about, and I'm going to come straight to you, Neil, on this, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about this, is actually at that point, is it about novel uses, or not novel uses, but local usage and medicine optimization, and something that Bob can facilitate from a pharma to NHS point of view?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, James, and thank you for the very kind words and the invitation to be on your lovely webinar. And it was about 18 months ago we came to a webinar, and Mark, who's the other co-founder, presented the concept of Bob. And so since then, we've got our seed funding, formed our team, launched our product early, and we're now going into Series A round and selling to pharma. So in the space of 18 months, we've really gone from a concept through to actually about to sign contracts with a number of very innovative, forward-thinking companies. So basically, just to let you know, so Bob is basically a peer-to-peer sharing platform, and what we do is help NHS staff tell stories about how they make a change in their local system. So that can be any change. It could be something around, HR. It could be how to introduce a medicine. It could be how they reorganize the car parking or the invoicing of bank staff. So it's any story about change in the NHS, and we have a tech platform which actually captures a story, and then people are able to share that. And a lot of what we're doing is word of mouth sharing and really driving. So if someone reads a story that's useful, we say, share this with other people, because if you found it useful, others will. So that's a big drive of what we're doing. And that's a completely free service for the NHS. It doesn't cost them a bean to use the platform. So we're creating this new peer-to-peer sharing platform, and we develop that with 24 NHS staff, and we continue to sort of release new modules and iterate every single week. We release new stuff on the platform, so it's very exciting. From the pharma side, what we're doing is helping companies tell stories of collaborative working, which might be the market access department, but also stories of how an innovation is used optimally in a local setting to bring maximum value to patients, maximum benefit to patients and value to the NHS. So most brands that you will have all worked on in your careers will have, that best case study use of, in a local setting, one hospital, one centre of excellence where they really use the brand well, and use that medicine well. And what we do is help that best practice sharing activity, which most of us, if you've worked in pharma marketing, most of us have spent time doing best practice sharing activities. But ours is peer-to-peer, so it's an individual who delivered the change, talking about how did they optimize that. And we actually did a survey with pharma folk, and what we have found is that normally within 6 months of launch, 80% of brands within 6 months of launch have a best practice use. Often that will come because it was a clinical trial centre or something like that. But what's really interesting, we then asked people, so you get it within 6 months, you've got a best practice use. We then say, do you profile best practice? And about more than half of the people we surveyed have said, no, we don't really profile best practice enough. So even though they know you've got a local setting where it works really well and they've set the system up, what they're not doing is profiling that. So yes, you could use Bob at any stage in the life cycle, certainly would be of value for established brands. And Dan, who's on the call, I remember doing some work with Dan about on an AstraZeneca anesthetic, where we just reminded people of the data, and we just did 3 sessions with talking about the data and reminded everyone that this was a great product, and they got a big increase in sales. So that speaks to what Chris talked about, and just reminding people that brands exist, medicines exist, and you're using the more promoted one, but when you remind people, they're like, oh yeah, I did use that, and that was really good. So I think that's really valuable. So Bob can be used at basically any stage, and normally we found out that within 6 months you have a best practice use. So that's what we're helping companies to profile, but we're also profiling the medicine in a pathway, and we're also profiling the both referral and diagnostic pathway. So any best practice around how a medicine might be delivered, as well as the collaborative learning. But I think, it is really exciting times for what we're talking about. And one of the things Bob does is we're basically helping create insight and understanding about how you create optimal use. and we're putting it on a platform which allows people to find and share that information in their moment of need when their boss says we need to overhaul our gastro service, and they find Bob's stories. But also a big part of what we're doing is exactly what Ben and Chris and Audrey have been talking about in terms of we're creating content that helps spark conversations. So, you know, about optimal use and how you make change happen within the NHS. And so, yeah, I think I've definitely learned some good stuff from Chris and Ben and Audrey today about how farmers interacting. But I do think it's interesting, this idea of the rep is not dead, and digital can enable that. So I think that's a really encouraging message that doctors still want to have these conversations and they still want to learn. So I think that's really a positive my take from it, because I just kept hearing the rep's dead, the rep's dead, the rep's dead, but it turns out that's not true.
Thank you, Neil. It's interesting on the rep front. God, when was I talking about this the other day? We run a rep advisory board from different companies to come together and just tell us what's going on, so we can keep our finger on the pulse. And one of the guys was saying how much older school reps are feeling under threat from the multi-channel, that they don't feel they're keeping up with it, which is just an aside, that, you know, that the rep is not dead, but the multi-channel rep may be on the rise. Certainly, that's what I believe. So I'd be interested, Ben, Audrey, from you're obviously this product's a success, right? So you're putting this in place for a lot of customers, and it can be both rep orchestrated but centrally orchestrated. Are you seeing a predominance from a rep perspective, or a head office managing where are you seeing the most sort of installations and the direction of travel on that?
So I'll start.
Sorry, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'll start, because I think one of the things that's been really interesting is it definitely came out of a Viva need. So, you know, the reps are off the road. For a while, they've not been contacting customers at all, and now they're just starting to be able to initiate those discussions again. And actually, you know, depending on local requirements, consent is required, you know, to be able to continue that dialogue. But even more so now, they're not able to physically go and capture that. You know, we all know that. I think there's some historical stat that in person, most consent from pharma was captured face to face, about 70%. You know, probably looking back a couple of years. So the need is definitely there, because they're saying, actually, how do I continue that access, or how do I get access, very much as Chris said, to those physicians that I either am not able to reach now physically, but also potentially they're still wanting to do those kind of symposia, those small meetings, and they've got no way of capturing, you know, being able to capture that consent and send those follow-ups and provide those resources that, you know, to your point, James, at the beginning, that we know, you know, I did a physician panel just in October, and the doctors still then said the same to me then, you know, if my rep serves me well, that's all I need. You know, they can provide me resources that help me in my practice and with my patients. So it started there, in short, I think, and it's actually grown. So I think actually the solution started very much just as a rep solution, and then, you know, a couple of companies just said, but what about, you know, X, Y, Z, and that's how it's actually grown. So it definitely starts with the rep, because I think that, you know, as per the discussion Chris has started with, and everything we've said, you know, the role of the rep, they're having to reinvent themselves, they're having to future-proof that role. So it starts there, but it doesn't mean that it finishes there. So definitely, you know, it's all part of the multi-channel, kind of that omni-channel journey. So I don't know, Ben, if you want to add anything.
No, I think you covered it, Audrey, but yeah, from the rep side, and it just grew from that one-to-one consent to this one-to-many, then it's become from small country levels to global initiatives now. So it's a huge thing, and it's growing weekly for us. So it's great.
Okay, cool. Chris, you had obviously fantastic data on where reps still have influence, and this threat of losing 50% of our share of voice. And I certainly start to feel a little bit out of depth when we get to social and what I call doctors in the wild, right? It sounds terrible, like some sort of website you shouldn't see, but you know, where you know, the doctors are out there doing their thing, like you say, they're on their mobile. Was it 81% see it as where they do their clinical research, you know, their clinical tool, etc. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit to MedShare and a little bit about, you know, in terms of what's the where can we add value in that sense, right? So if they're out there and they're on their platform, they're sharing. So you and I had a really interesting conversation that doctors are just like us, right? What do we share on LinkedIn? What do we do on social? Well, what I consume is stuff that I'm, and what I like to share is stuff that I'm not 100% sure about. It's on the periphery of what I'm interested in. What I write and what I share that I've created is right in my expertise. But what I'm interested in is what crazy marketing Nike have been doing, or what crazy digital solution the NFL are using to bring that sort of stuff. So, and you talk to how that's, well, doctors the same, right?
Exactly that point. Very well made. Yeah, I mean, doctors are exactly like us in terms of most of their behaviours. I mean, their interests are probably slightly different from ours from a professional setting. But if you look at how they're engaging on social media, it does match those behaviours that we have and where they're spending their time. So the vast majority of where we spend our time online is actually heavily dominated by social media peer-to-peer interaction platforms. And if you look at the websites that you've been on today, it's probably, you might have checked in on Twitter, you might have had a quick look at LinkedIn, you've probably then done a few searches through Google. So the doctor's behaviours are going to be very similar to that. If they're a hospital doctor, they're not sat in front of a computer. What's in front of them is their mobile device. So inevitably, that's going to be driving those behaviours. So if they've got an interesting patient, they're going to be looking that up on peer-to-peer networking platforms like MedShare to see what cases there are that other doctors have posted around that type of patient. They're going to be diving onto publication app to download a few and to look at a few articles to check in on a few pieces of data. If they're looking at pharma site, it might well be to quickly check in on the dosing information so that they can prescribe. So you're going to see those same behaviours. And similarly on MedShare, and MedShare, as I mentioned, is very much a kind of blend of Instagram and LinkedIn, but just for verified healthcare professionals. And they share patient cases on there with each other. And you see those same behaviors. You might think that that's kind of like a secondary diagnosis tool or a second opinion tool, but that's not really how it's used. It's used in the same way that we would use a platform like LinkedIn. People tend to post about things they already know. They're not posting questions out, say, oh, I don't know what to do here. But you can't really imagine a doctor doing that. They're posting around areas that they already know, that are of interest to them, that may be an interesting case, a difficult case, something abnormal, something slightly different. Then the doctors who are engaging with that are typically the doctors on the fringe of that practice, who are then engaging with it because it's interesting, it stands out, there's something to learn for them, and they can engage with a more senior doctor around how they might manage that. And then the conversation is just a bundle, a bit like LinkedIn, of senior doctors, specialists, other doctors, all chipping in with different opinions, some demonstrating their knowledge and expertise, some asking genuine questions. And yeah, we see that whole mix of great posts, terrible posts, high engagement, low engagement, people interested in all sorts of weird and wacky areas of medicine. So I think sometimes the mistake we make in pharma marketing is thinking that doctors are in some way different. Doctors are in a lot of ways very similar in their behaviors, especially their online behaviors, to all of us and to the way that we engage with content. And what they find interesting is typically, and how they find content is typically quite similar to how we do that on our weekends or on the sofa with the kids or after this meeting finishes or whatever else across those social media channels. So I think understanding those behaviors is really helpful in terms of understanding where to place content and also what types of content is going to drive that engagement, pull people through to provide consent to see more of that content, and then allow you to be able to deliver some of those messages that previously we would have delivered through the field team, but then now increasingly we're going to need to be able to deliver through other channels, more digital channels, how you can drive that funnel through to continuing to have that share of voice that's been so impactful over so many years.
Yeah, and we got a comment from, or question comment from, well, it's not a question, from Louise Hope, who says she also believes HCPs are human beings, so why should their behaviours be any different to the rest of us? And then that's very true. And we sometimes do put them up on pedestals, and like you say, they wouldn't, maybe in a public domain, so they don't know what they're doing. But I love the fact that the first real sort of internet tool that doctors were using was, if I remember, derma.net, where it's basically dermatologists just going, what the hell is this? Has anyone ever seen anything like this before? And sharing images, because you know what, everyone needs to reach out for help. Right, I do have unless anyone else on the panel has a follow-on comment from Chris's point on that. Okay, I've got a question from Heather Hancock. It's lengthy, so I'm going to read it out as I go. So I'll see how I go. So, would you make a distinction, I think, between primary and secondary care? With the advent of SDP, ICS, and PCNs, there is a move to population health. This fosters tenders of product and solution delivered by disease educators who may or may not be remote. If this is a solution, the tender will drive the price down, and it will not be possible to have extensive field force if margins are to be maintained. In secondary care, the need for greater education and cases will require a rep that can manage the NHS system. And she didn't mean being distinction, not dissection. I don't know if you can talk to that. Actually, also with regard to GP practices, there is a shift to locums who will not waste time with. Okay, we'll come back to that one. But in terms of tenders and pricing, especially, where that's being forced, etc., and what that means to reps and field forces, etc. And this might talk a little bit to what we were talking about earlier, that there's a push towards more scientific delivery. MSLs and MLMs who've been, that I can only see growing, and then you've got your market access and the commercial side of it, which may be more. So I don't know if anyone can speak to that.
It's a difficult question.
Just how I threw that one out there.
Yeah, everyone's like, oh.
If anyone's got a solution for that, they're made.
We'll just say we agree, shall we?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, Heather second.
Pass, very difficult, very good question. I think that would be a marvelous question for some market access experts. I think my expertise is absolutely in terms of doctor comms, doctor behaviours, and so typically not able to answer that kind of market access question.
In fact, Heather, one of my fellow interest group leads at the PM Society on the market access interest group is running a webinar very shortly. I try and intersperse these so we don't trip over each other on topics such as that and what's happening now, and how, the same questions for market access experts, how are they going to access the people that they were pre-COVID and all that kind of stuff. So Heather, if I've got your email address, I'll try and hook you up if you're not already a part of that market access group.
I do think, though, maybe your point as well, James, about those, you've got the more senior reps who are perhaps more averse to some of the digital channels. However, their seniority or their experience of the healthcare system in their environment, some more of the key account manager types of roles, I know that's slightly different to what we're looking at here, but I definitely think, the point around secondary care, I think that's going to be, even more critical, provided they can stay relevant and they can, really leverage the technologies to be able to keep those dialogues going. Because often that channel the challenge with that kind of seniority is they kind of feel they know it, they can do it. Why are marketing giving me this? So it's about really engaging. I like that you said you're having those advisory boards with the reps, because that's what it's about. It's about understanding what they understand about the customers, serving them the right content to then be able to have those interactions with the key decision makers.
Yeah, and not leaving some of those reps behind who have huge equity with customers, value and knowledge around the territory, but may just be being left behind by some of the technology. Heather has a follow-up here, and I find this really interesting because it talks to another, I'm not sure how well this will go down in terms of the panel and your range of experience, but also with regard to GP practice, there's a shift to locums who will not waste time with a rep. They will seek info online. So if the rep is the rep dead in those situations? So this speaks a little bit to when I was a rep, the opportunistic meal calls you try and do, hang around the back door waiting for them to come out for their coffee or a fag, and you try and, not that we should recommend that, but and in the water cooler influences within a surgery, you had secretaries, ward managers, private secretaries, etc., that you would leverage to get a meeting with doctors, etc. Those are gone. How do you do that? Well, you can do the phone calls possibly, etc. And how did you handle locums? Were you just using locums to bump your numbers up? Well, this may all talk to this, the non-specific customer that we've got, but also that maybe influencing those is more out in the wild than it is for a rep. So I think, Neil, you've got one. Good, thank you.
I just want to just say that one of the things I think I'm a big champion for joint working and collaborative working that Pharma is doing with the NHS, and I think the big untapped resource are those amazing stories that companies have got So one of the things we will be doing with Bob is helping to tell those stories of collaborative working. So you'll have stories which are sort of jointly authored by the company person and the person in the NHS who championed some really innovative work and really digging into how did they make that change happen and how might you get replication and knowledge. So I would just really encourage everybody on the call is go and understand those stories. That your market access teams, so often they've done these amazing projects. They really have dug in to understand the system. You could spark really great conversations, and they're kind of sat latent in the market access department because they get a tiny bit of airtime, but no one really digs into them. And if you have got a bit of spare bandwidth at the moment, contact the market access teams. Like, tell me about that initiative we did a year ago, or what initiatives are we doing? Because I think there's this huge knowledge, and when you start digging into those stories and really understanding how you've made change happen, that could be really good in another territory to spark understanding. So I think there is, as all of these, you know, as you've talked about the primary care networks and everything sort of bundling together, there are great collaboration opportunities for businesses and a lot of knowledge which could help you to do when you have your conversations with your clients, because you're just going to understand the way they work even better. So I just go talk to your market access teams, because they have, a lot of them have done amazing things, and it just gets locked in a company and no one knows.
Absolutely. Second. Sorry, go on. No, was that me talking over myself? I was absolutely second that, Neil. And it's the even back in my day, 20 years ago, where, you know, formulary packs, formulary decisions, you were sharing best practice around how formulary adoption happened in one hospital, and then you were trying to package it up, share it with another, and if you could, you'd try and get someone from that formulary committee to back you up on it. You had everything from new pathways that you try and share from one hospital to another, initiatives around patient medicines audits, all those kind of things were done, and as a rep, you were trying to share those out. So the fact that you've got it's an easier platform through Bob to get those sort of, and that's what maybe it isn't make it. It's the thing with Bob is it doesn't have to be a formal poster. It's, you know, it's a very, not, is informal the right word, Neil? Easy to do, right? It doesn't.
Story.
Stories. That's right. Sorry, of course.
Story about how change happened, but I just think there are just these amazing insights, and as these groups form and things cluster, and there is within the business, within everyone's companies, there will be amazing knowledge to extract from each other. So I think, you know, we're all zoomed out, but getting on the phone and having some conversations with those colleagues about how they are making change happen in settings is really valuable.
Chris, thank you, Neil.
Yeah, completely agree. Just coming back to the question around the GP practices and those hard to engage locums. I guess there's two things. The first one is how important the other doctors at that practice are. You know, and also in secondary care, when you look at some of the big factors of what influences doctors, what other doctors around them, their direct peers do, plays a huge role in what they prescribe. And you see that in a really simple, direct way with the secondary care initiation of a prescription carried through into primary care. But that has a double impact. One, in primary care, you're going to have to change that script, which has come from a specialist in secondary care, which is a bold thing to do. But secondly, you're also seeing that straightforward endorsement from secondary care of this is the right medicine for this patient. And that's reinforcing then in your mind, the next time you see that type of patient, that if you're initiating prescribing, what are you likely to initiate in terms of that prescribing, what you've seen the expert in secondary care actually do. So you've got that influence loop at play. But then when the locum's in the practice, inevitably, if there's any doubt in their mind about what they should be prescribing, they will engage with one or two of the other doctors within that practice to sense check that script, or sense check what the practice's approach to that type of patient is. So you're going to have that reinforcement loop. I think in terms of the direct opportunity with them, if you can engage them across those digital platforms, that influence loop works the other way around, because the locum will have gone into the practice having worked in other places with perhaps a different approach to managing patients to the practice. So again, that influence loop works the other way around in that conversation. The locum go, ah, yeah, but I've seen great outcomes with this medicine with these patients, or the guidelines suggest that this might be a better approach, or did you see that new publication and that new paper that's just come out that might change the way you think about it? So if you can reach those locums through those digital channels and you can gain consent to get conversations with them, which is totally possible to do, even if they're quite anti-pharma, anti-rep, if you can draw them into something really interesting, they then have that potential to influence lots of other doctors, so they can be quite high value. So I just thought it was kind of interesting, interesting to think about it in terms of the influence that doctors have over each other, and how important building that network around your customers and around those points of influence can be. It doesn't necessarily just have to be directly with one doctor. If you can influence the network, you can influence the doctor.
Well said. And actually, Neil's posted a question, and I thought you had expanded on this, and I think you really should. Which is this is for you, Chris. Which is explaining your mature brand advertising strategy, which I found absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
When I was before you go on to this is the equivalent of us having branded sticky pads everywhere all over the doctor's office, right? When we left, and that talks to the locums who didn't care about reps, but you got some free pens out of it. But I really like this is the modern take now that we can't give pens and pads away. So off you go, Chris.
Yeah, and I guess also it's just sort of something thought-provoking, I think, to think about advertising as well. So with mature brands, the doctors know everything about the brand anyway. They've probably been using it for 10, 15 years. So there's less opportunity to provide them with education or to provide them with high-value stuff that sits around it, because they know everything about the product and whether they are or aren't going to prescribe it. But what tends to happen over time is that they forget about it, for the simple reason that there's loads of other noise, there's more exciting new products being launched, there's lots of communication going to them. And so they see that patient, and maybe then they're not necessarily thinking about that brand they've used for many years, which is where ads come in. Because if you can deliver really cheap ads to them that simply is a reminder that the brand exists, and when they see that patient, they're like, oh, this brand's been around for years, I love it, I know it works, I know all about it, I know the ins and outs of it, this is the product that I need to prescribe. So if that's the goal, and then you want to make the ads as cheap as possible to deliver. So this is where this whole idea of kind of reverse optimizing for engagement, because the last thing that you want that doctor to do is click on those ads, because then they become much more expensive. And actually, Facebook has been talking about this since 2015, of the most clicky users, when the ads that get the most engagement are the most expensive. So what you want to be doing is you want to be reverse optimizing, minimizing the level of engagement with ads. And you see that with purchase intent. So in a consumer setting, the ads that get clicked on have no direct correlation with purchase intent, no direct correlation with brand awareness. When you look at it in an online to offline setting, people who have viewed the ads are no more likely to purchase in store, who have clicked on the ads are no more likely to purchase in store than those who have just seen them. So in that setting of mature brands, where you just want to create that reminder that the brand exists, the last thing that you want to try and do is get people to click. You just simply want to deliver that ad with maximum reach, so the maximum number of your potential prescribers or new prescribers see that ad and have that reinforcement of the brand, so that they can then remember and prescribe that product that they've always known and loved. So that's kind of the mature brand advertising strategy. I just caveat that there's specific scenarios where that works and is relevant, and there are other scenarios where you're going to want to deliver a high level of engagement. You're going to want people to follow through a journey. You want to get them engaged and clicking and providing consent. So it just needs to be balanced out as to when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate, depending on the life cycle stage you're at, your objectives, etc.
Great. I love that. What seems completely counterintuitive, but successful strategy that talks to Neil's point about Dan, and it's probably EMLA, the product that you'd shared data on the local. No, okay. But the idea of just reminding people of data when it comes to the established brands. Right, is there, we haven't got any more questions. We're at 23 minutes past, so we can give some time back. Does any of the panelists have anything further to add to this? Okay.
Good, James.
So,
thank you.
No, okay. So I want to say a big thank you.
Actually, just one last thing, James. I think thank you, because I think it's great and really interesting. I guess I just wanted to leave a final thought, which is that share of voice and how influential share of voice is. Of course, content and how impactful and how valuable it is important, but your overall share of voice with your target audience is incredibly important. You're at real risk of losing significant share of voice because of COVID. And you need to reshape those strategies and those approaches to ensure that you maintain that share of voice with your audience. And because if you don't, it has a significant commercial impact come 6 to 12 months time. So I guess I just wanted to sort of leave that final thought, sort of seed that in. I think that rounds up some of the things that we've talked about.
Yeah, and this here, that was my summary.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. No, it's fine. You saved me some time. But that was word for pretty much word for word as to where I was going. So I don't need to say anything more except to thank you all, Ben, Audrey, Chris, and Neil, and Christine as a co-host. Christine was on the panel conferencing. Yep. We didn't, so apologies. There wasn't anything I wondered that would be appropriate for yourself. Thank you everyone for attending. If there's any questions or follow-ups, obviously you can come through to us. We've got the email addresses, or you can probably find everyone on LinkedIn. Like I say, I would absolutely encourage you to follow Chris both on Twitter and LinkedIn. Check out Bob, and you're probably already, if you're on this call, checking out Trustrack's consent capture product. In terms of the Pharma MCM, if you've got any bright ideas, if you've got an amazing case study that stands out that you'd like to share, that's different to everyone else's, come forward with ideas. We run these every 4 to 6 weeks. And this will be recorded, well, it is being recorded. It will be up on our YouTube channel. At some point, we'll flag that for you. I hope you've enjoyed today, and I hope you'll join us again at future meetings. One last thought, which is, it is a tough time out there for a lot of people. There's probably a work colleague that you used to enjoy spending time with, who you maybe have moved jobs, maybe for whatever reason you haven't been in touch for a while. So send them an email, give them a phone call, just shoot the breeze with them, just see how they are. I'm going to end on that message, and thank you all for your time today.
Thanks, guys. It was great.